Hi everyone, my name is Natalia Rohatyn-Martin, and I'm an assistant professor at MacEwan University. And today I want to talk to you about cognitive and physical fatigue. So I want you to imagine an undergraduate lecture. So you as the instructor, you're playing a 20-minute video highlighting a course concept. Unexpectedly, the audio track halts and the students have to watch the video via subtitles. After about 5 minutes, you observe that students are getting restless, they're looking around at the classroom, closing their eyes, and no longer taking notes. This event actually occurred in my Inclusive Educational Practices course and provided an ideal vehicle to discuss fatigue. Students commented that they felt drained from concentrating so hard in unexpected ways. I had to stop watching as my eyes were getting tired. I was aware that I was blinking more to reduce my eye strain. Students also expressed a newfound empathy for the challenges that individuals with hearing loss face on a daily basis. I feel bad for students who have to go through this on a daily basis. I'm exhausted. Rarely in our daily lives do we really stop to consider the cognitive, visual, auditory, and attention demands within everyday educational lessons. How might students who are deaf or hard of hearing then cope for up to 3 hours per class, 5 days a week, where they have to focus simultaneously on information presented auditorily and visually across multiple, sometimes overlapping speakers? So my goal here is to increase faculty and staff understanding of the possible impact of fatigue on the educational success for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So what is fatigue then? There's many different definitions, but overall, the definition I like to stick to is that it's an overwhelming sense of exhaustion and decreased energy for physical and mental activity, despite adequate amounts of sleep. And it's typically associated with stress-related situations or long-term conditions and recovery from illness, injury, or trauma. Often, fatigue is misunderstood or misinterpreted. And as I'll show you on the next slide, it can be subjective or objective. Subjectively, fatigue is defined as a decline in the efficiency of an individual's focus, concentration, and alertness. Objectively, it's defined as a decline in an individual's performance due to sustained or prolonged demands. And there's different types of exertion experienced by individuals, which can be in the form of physical or mental fatigue. Physical fatigue is defined as an exertion in an activity that leads to muscle strain. So examples include typing at a computer for an extended period of time that causes muscle cramp, or eye strain resulting from auditory or visual exertion needed to comprehend information in a noisy classroom. Mental fatigue typically refers to cognitive tiredness, and it's associated with a decline in attention and concentration. Some aspects that may contribute to mental fatigue are time available to complete a task difficulty or complexity, and psychological stress related to an inability to complete a task or lack of experience with the task. I want you to look at this list and see how many of these you can identify by the end of your workday. Do you feel poor concentration, difficulty remembering information? Do you have trouble recalling things? Do you feel a little agitated? Do you feel disorganized or have disjointed thinking? You may be laughing because at some days, at the end of the day, you might be feeling all of these things. But now I want you to imagine feeling like this halfway through your workday, and then being expected to work at your best for the remainder of the day. Sure, it may have happened a few times, but now consider having students who are deaf or hard of hearing in the classroom who have to do this on a daily basis. There's 2 factors that actually might contribute then to this fatigue for students: auditory effort and visual effort. Auditory effort refers to the cognitive exertion required to attend to and understand a spoken message. Spoken messages in the classroom must often be processed and understood in the presence of noise. For example, classroom chatter, squeaking of moving chairs, ventilation systems, or hallway noise. Research reports that students in general actually perform poorly in noisy classrooms regardless of their hearing ability. So, with a compromised auditory system, students who are deaf or hard of hearing, for example, need to work much harder to attend to and understand spoken messages than students with full hearing abilities. Even the seemingly simple act of localizing sound sources in a classroom may be challenging for students who are deaf or hard of hearing, particularly when there's competing noises or when speaker utterances overlap. Visual effort involves the physical and mental exertion required to visually attend to and comprehend a message. Classroom examples include looking at a person communicating a spoken message, reading a textbook, or watching a video. Fatigue can also result because an auditory signal in amplification devices is rarely equivalent to typical hearing levels, and students often attempt to use visual information to compensate for the diminished auditory signal. So for students who communicate or learn through sign language, greater level fatigues related to visual effort may actually arise as these students attempt to simultaneously or alternatively listen to their teacher and an interpreter to comprehend classroom instruction or conversation. When it comes to research on fatigue, there actually hasn't been a lot of research conducted on the area of fatigue with specifically students who are deaf or hard of hearing in a classroom setting. Many studies will mention fatigue effects, but not how it can impact a student or their education. Rarely have students been positioned as key informants about their own educational experiences, especially when talking about potentially disadvantageous or beneficial educational practices within their classrooms when talking about the effects of fatigue. Without that student voice, their social, academic, vocational, and economic outcomes can be compromised. Investigating how students experience fatigue is also valuable for us educators and potentially policymakers, as listening to the student voice can really help inform and enhance our decisions when it comes to pedagogy and to support increased student engagement, motivation, and achievement. So when it came to my research, the primary goal of my pilot study was to refine the structured interview questions about the experiences of students who are deaf or hard of hearing had in inclusive classrooms. The students were individually interviewed with semi-structured interview questions. But I really wanted to know further about how their feelings of fatigue were really compounded in the classroom. I had 5 participants, which included a graduate study enrolled in a Master's of Deaf Education program, and some junior high and high school students attending classrooms in a mainstream school. All 5 students had severe to profound hearing loss and used some type of assistive technology, whether it was digital hearing aids or bilateral cochlear implants. All of the students used spoken English to communicate with me, but some did utilize an American Sign Language interpreter in the classroom. There were 4 themes that really came about in my pilot study. The amount of listening effort students had to put forth, the different types of listening conditions they were in, survival mechanisms to really get through those feelings of fatigue, and the idea of something being just not worth the effort. So for the sake of time, I'm going to go through each theme and only give 1 or 2 examples of what the participants stated. So for listening effort, this was the increased effort that they needed to listen to and comprehend classroom conversations and instruction compared to their hearing peers. So Peter said, "Every day I have to concentrate on the interpreters, or when people talk to me. I have to concentrate on the words that they're saying to me. It's really tiring, and for some reason, I'm not able to stick it into my head for a long time." He went on to explain, "I don't like to sit and watch the interpreters all the time because hearing people, they can move around or text or daydream, but for me, I have to watch and concentrate all the time. It's tiring, and if I turn around, I miss something, and I don't want to interrupt the class. I feel like it drains me out because I can't use my natural language. I have to concentrate on the interpreter. Lip reading is very difficult for me. I'm okay with a little bit at a time, but if it's for a long time, I just give up." It's pretty telling. When it comes to listening conditions, They are environmental factors that impact the ability to attend to and comprehend classroom instruction or conversation. Mark professed that he experienced varying levels of fatigue while using his FM in the classroom, especially during loud activities. When the kids are very, very loud and the noise is like echoing in the room, then if the teacher tries to talk, I won't hear because of all the noise echoing in the classroom. All the noise can really make it hard to hear sometimes. It was actually interesting to note that it wasn't until I specifically asked Mark about using a malfunctioning FM system in the class that he realized concentrating to hear in a noisy environment was what was actually contributing to him feeling fatigued. So he elaborated on that a little bit. Yeah, it's like I'm trying to listen, but sometimes it's too noisy. I didn't know that I got tired because I was wearing my FM unit, but it's probably that. I try really hard to listen because a whole bunch of kids are really loud. I never thought about that before, but that's probably why. So listening conditions can actually make a difference. Now I want to talk about survival mechanisms. These are strategies that the students described to cope with overwhelming classroom listening demands and the fatigue that they were ultimately feeling. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're ideal, but these were what the students were actually doing. Peter said, "If I fall behind, I just give up and I nod. My mind is not able to work hard enough or fast enough to get the words together. I'm only able to pick some of the pieces up, but not the whole thing." So if you see students just nodding along in your classroom, they might not actually really be attending. And Coley says, "Sometimes I'll pretend I'm listening. Sometimes I really am, but sometimes I'm not." So that's important to keep in mind as well. And then some students talked about how it just wasn't worth the effort. So when those survival mechanisms were no longer effective and the participants just had to disengage. Mark says, "Sometimes I just think, what's the point? So I put my head down on the desk and I think about other things." That can be really hard to see students disengaging in your classroom. So it's really important that we actually see the fatigue for what it is for each individual student and see what we can do as instructors to really mitigate those feelings for them. When it comes to effort expenditure, really regardless of whether my participants used amplification or an interpreter, several talked about feeling higher levels of effort expenditure than their peers without hearing loss, especially when they had to locate sound sources, understand teacher instructions, and they had to follow classroom discussions. Coley explained that he felt he always had to work harder and faster in class, especially when taking notes. He explained, "I have to work harder watching the interpreter. There's just so much to catch up on. I have to rush to get my notes down and then learn it on my own. I don't have time to learn it at the same time that I write because I'm too busy writing what the interpreter says." So now what can we do to really help mitigate these feelings of fatigue for students? All the participants clearly described their successes, challenges, and barriers with learning environments or different learning materials that affected their access to knowledge or their ability to attend to teacher instruction. Unfortunately, meeting the variety of needs for students who are deaf or hard of hearing continues to be challenging for many instructors. Some researchers argued that educators need to consider making education more convenient and comfortable for students with diverse cultural backgrounds and more flexible for students with differing learning preferences. So to address the barriers participants described and to assist educators with planning their curriculum, teaching, learning, and assessment for these diverse learners, Universal Design for Learning will be a framework that I'm going to use to discuss supports for students who are deaf or hard of hearing in differing contexts. So Universal Design for Learning is actually described as a framework aimed to address potential barriers to learning in curriculum or classroom and to reduce such barriers through initial designs with inherent flexibility to enable the curriculum itself to adjust to individual learners. It also helps to address learner variability by evoking flexible methods to empower educators and to maximize learning for the students themselves. So when it comes to UDL, there's 3 essential principles: multiple means of representation, multiple means of engagement, and multiple means of action and expression. I'm going to structure my conclusions in the following format. Shelley Moore draws on literature on positive behavior support when she talks about the need to understand personal, social, and intellectual purpose for students. Personal being personal awareness and responsibility, personal identity, and culture. Social being communication or social responsibility, and intellectual being creative thinking or critical thinking. I'll be using this framework to outline what to do next for students who are deaf or hard of hearing under the umbrella of UDL. And when speaking to UDL, I'll frame my suggestions with MMR, multiple means of representation, MME, multiple means of engagement, and MMAE, multiple means of action and expression. It's imperative to note that although I'm focusing on implications as they relate to challenges and barriers, a lot of participants actually reported that instructors are already providing classroom and curriculum adaptations. So in terms of personal and multiple means of representation, students describe fatigue symptoms throughout the school day or throughout certain classes. Students themselves need to be aware of the symptoms and potential fatigue contributors in their classes themselves. So they need to identify the sources of fatigue. It's also important for instructors and faculty alike to be able to identify when your students are starting to feel fatigued. Once students are able to identify the source of their fatigue, they may be able to better communicate their needs to their instructors for rectification. Social and multiple means of engagement. It would be beneficial then that students are supported to advocate for their needs to be able to rectify their fatigue feelings. To keep students engaged and to mitigate the feelings of fatigue, it's essential that brain and hearing breaks are provided to students throughout the day. What might this look like? It might be in your 3-hour class that you're actually letting students have a 5-minute break every half hour. Or if you have an hour-long class, maybe giving them 5 minutes in between an activity or a lecture. When it comes to intellectual and multiple means of action and expression, if you know that your students are fatigued, so you've already picked up on those fatiguing symptoms and signs, be flexible with timing of assessment. Maybe they can write in short rounds, or maybe they can have longer time. Maybe it's an assignment that they're able to bring home and complete instead of having to hand it in at the end of class. Just being able to be very flexible in what you're providing for your students and what they're able to provide back for you to show you their understanding. So what then is the implication or maybe even recommendations from the students themselves? For effort required to participate in classroom lessons, these factors aren't well understood by instructors. To increase participation of students who are deaf and hard of hearing, and to reduce their fatigue, it's important for instructors to offer frequent breaks, alternate between whole class and small group lessons, combine auditory, visual, and kinesthetic learning opportunities within your lessons, and to reduce speaker overlap in classroom discussions. When it comes to developing appropriate coping mechanisms, we as instructors have a primary and critical role when it comes to developing appropriate coping strategies. If we continue to misinterpret possible fatigue indicators, such as distractibility, inattention, or students being disinterested as behavior problems, students will likely not receive those appropriate supports needed to really recognize their own fatigue and then be able to alleviate those feelings. And of course, there's always need for more research in the area of fatigue. And us as instructors, we're uniquely positioned to really provide students with internal and external supports to help alleviate or cope with those fatigue feelings. Now, what are some recommendations from the research itself? Ensure that listening is made as easy as possible. If students need amplification, then using consistent amplification through an FM system. Or you can make simple adaptations to the environment themselves to ensure that background noise is kept as low as possible. Know the student's learning style and try to roll with it. You can tap into ways of learning that suit the students best so that they can use their energy learning in the most effective way. Slowing down the pace of a lesson to allow for additional processing time. Breaking down a larger piece of work into smaller steps can help students better estimate how long it might take them to actually complete it. And it might help give them a focus for each time they sit down to actually do the work in class. Schedule breaks and really stick with it. You can use the breaks to hydrate yourself, the students, and help them move around a little bit, which can help them to focus or to reward themselves for what's already been completed. But the biggest thing is to be aware of students' fatigue symptoms and their triggers, and that starts with having just a small conversation with the student. So there is clearly a need for additional research in this area, but the few studies that have been conducted really provide clear evidence of the educational challenges faced by students when it comes to unmitigated fatigue. When I talked to you earlier about the opening vignette when students had to read the subtitles instead of being able to listen to that video, it really validates the comments of different study participants and the students talking about educators often not having a concept of the challenges that students face when it comes to learning in classroom environments. There's visual or auditory obstacles that they're dealing with. So it's equally important for us as instructors and educators to develop an awareness of the specific fatigue challenges for students and to accurately recognize and discern classroom coping behaviors so we can really provide the appropriate supports before students become exhausted in our classrooms and then disengage. We need to create classroom language that provides students with a means to describe and acknowledge their fatigue symptoms. That way they can develop a set of appropriate coping strategies and maybe even role-playing classroom fatigue scenarios along with the use of appropriate coping strategies could significantly change the daily fatigue cycle for many students. We as instructors are uniquely positioned to provide students with the internal and external supports to really help students alleviate or cope with fatigue that's really inherent in the educational system. Although my focus has been specifically on the challenges faced by students, I really hope that you, as educators and instructors, can review these recommendations and really point to exciting opportunities to enhance your classroom environments and instructions for all the students. Thank you.